Hello, this is Richard from PAS. This video will give you a quick guide to calculating the hourly rate used for your fee schedule. There are two different videos on completing the quantity and resources columns. This is going to be a really quick run through sheets 1 to 4 in your workbook. Starting here in staff time, I've got some dummy data here, but you can get your data by hitting the control sheet and reading the timesheets. You can do this at any stage throughout benchmarking. I reckon you should give it a go now to see what the numbers look like. We're not going to cover the detail of what goes under each activity code here, but there are lots of question answers on our forum. So you can go there and knock yourself out. You can search by code. So this will bring up how to use code 320, for example. So let's look at staff annualized. These total costs in columns B and C have just been brought across from the previous sheet. You can see here 127, and that's the number that starts there. As we're extrapolating your 4-week time recording snapshot across 12 months, you will almost certainly want to make some adjustments. And this sheet allows you to make two sorts of adjustments, one line by line and one global. For example, you might know from your management accounts that you spend £150,000 on combined annual leave and sickness. You can make an adjustment to make sure that you've accrued enough money. You do it by using column D and entering a percentage. So I'm going to start by putting in 10%. That doesn't give me the right amount of money here. So I can just eyeball it until I end up in the right place. And you can make any adjustments you like in much the same way. What you should do when you're making adjustments is just to make a quick note to yourself using the K column. So here I'm going to say adjusted annual leave in line with actuals from last year. However, don't worry about going through this line by line and making minor tweaks. A few pounds here and there is not going to kill anyone. You can also make global changes. For example, making that adjustment to annual leave has pushed up my total cost from £1 million, which I started with, to just over. And I can pull that number back into line, and the proportions are preserved between those cost types. Okay, let's move on to other costs. Here we're going to slow down a bit. According to SIPFA, this is the ugliest spreadsheet they've ever put their name to. This sheet allows you to recognise that some costs in some places are generated through timesheets, in other places through contractual arrangements. For example, this line here allows you to talk about scanning. Now for example, I might buy my scanning service in from a company, in which case I can put in the amount of that arrangement in column D. You'll notice that I'm entering just in thousands of pounds. And there's little value in being anal, so feel free to round up and down as appropriate. So as well as these costs that tell you which line they're going to go into, you can also use this sheet to input overhead codes, such as your accommodation costs. So for here on line 9, these costs are treated as overheads to the whole service. Let's say I spend £100,000. I don't need to do any more to that. That will be allocated across all parts of the service. But others need to be done manually. Here I'm going to put in 50,000 for transport. I need to allocate that money between the 4 overheads automatically because the spreadsheet is not in a position to know where the balance of that spend falls. So I have to say 15 there, 30 there, and 5 there. And if you're watching this number here, you can see it will warn me if the numbers I'm allocating here don't match up to that initial number. When you're filling in this sheet, you'll be having conversations with your accountant and using what you know about historical costs or service level agreements. You can also account for costs you predict will occur in the future. For example, a system upgrade that might only appear in year 4. Here on line 64, you can have a fund for future investment. If I put in 20 there, and a note for myself saying provision for system upgrade in 2015. There is a risk with this sheet that you can double count. Here on line 27, I'm going to capture 70,000 as a contribution to the call centre and one-stop shop provided by the council. But if I've been able to persuade those operators to complete timesheets, their costs might already appear in staff time. That will be double counting. If you have a choice, then it's best to do timesheeting. It's important also to think about income as well as costs. For example, you might have spent 50,000 on legal fees for the preparation of Section 106 agreements. But most councils just act as post boxes for costs like this and recharge them to applicants. Here on line 70, we can net income off against that cost. So, just to recap, make sure there are no red flags in the M column that will show that there's a mismatch between the budget and its allocation across the overheads. Use the notes column to explain any judgments you've made about the numbers, and recognise that this is not something that planners can do on their own. You'll need to negotiate some time with your corporate finance people, and you might need to do this more than once, so don't leave it to the last minute. The last sheet we're going to look at is the calculation sheet. This is where all of the costs get brought together: timesheeting, overheads, and work you buy in. There is nothing to input, you just need to make sure that you understand what the numbers are. So here on line 10 you can see that we had £23,000 of cost coming through from the timesheets, and there's that 70,000 that we input just now, giving a total cost of £93,000. To return to scanning, here on line 29 you can see a timesheet cost of 40,000, other costs of 50, and a contribution to overheads of 30. This 30,000 of overheads is made up of a proportion of the generic overhead costs, here at the top of the sheet, and those overheads that are specific to the handling of applications, in 399. As this receipting relates to a Type A application, you can see on the right-hand side of the sheet that it's an applicant cost, as opposed to the B flavour of this activity, which is borne by the council. In this part of the worksheet, you can see how the costs are divided between the Type A, which is borne by the applicant, and Type B, which is borne by the council. As you follow these columns down to the bottom, you can see how the total cost of planning activity of just over 1.2 million is divided out more or less evenly between the council and the applicant. Because we've also captured how many hours go into each activity, we can divide the applicant's cost, here £612,000, by the number of hours that this money buys, 12,302, to give an hourly rate of just under £50 an hour. Now, this has just been a run-through of how this sheet works mathematically. Please don't think that there's anything special about this particular hourly rate, or indeed these overhead figures. That's it for this podcast. Thanks for watching. Please post any feedback and questions on this video to the benchmarking discussion forum on the PAS website. And remember, there are 2 other videos covering the quantity and resources columns.